I am delighted to be here today at JST. It's fantastic to see colleagues again after a long time without seeing colleagues. Today, I'm going to be talking about the state of open data and opportunities for the society publisher. This is really thinking about what the future of publishing looks like in terms of data publishing, open access publishing, open research, and what I think a lot of people are looking for, which is fast but good open publishing. So that's what we're aiming for here. For those who don't know what figshare is, you may have heard of the repository figshare. It is a free platform where researchers can publish their data. They upload their files, add some metadata, and make it publicly available. But you may not know that we also provide functionality for repositories for organizations around the world. These repositories are designed to comply with local laws, comply with local policies, and make sure that the organization can have a robust data repository that just works. So we have an example with JStage Data, and I will be referencing some of the great work that they've been doing, but also thinking about how we can move on to the next step when it comes to data publishing. I mentioned that the repositories we build are ticking a lot of the boxes around making sure that the infrastructure works with local infrastructure, but also amplifies the data to a wider audience. So we make sure that everything is web accessible. We plug into Google Dataset Search. We use policies like make data count. And figshare itself has just turned 10 years old. So I've been working in this industry for 10 years, thinking about open research and open data. This slide demonstrates something from just over 10 years ago, which is a book called The Fourth Paradigm. The fourth paradigm is thinking about the next chapter in academic research. How do we move to the next level of knowledge discovery? So this book was written by Dr. Jim Gray, and his concept was, if we have all of the academic literature and all of the academic data online, we'll be able to build on top of research in a combination of humans and machines. So that is that the machines will be able to find knowledge using artificial intelligence or machine learning, and the humans will be able to interpret that knowledge, and as a combination, we'll be able to move much faster. So if I also look back 10 years ago, as I mentioned, figshare has just turned 10. So looking back 10 years and looking forward 10 years is something that I've done a lot of recently. And if we look at academic literature and academic data, I think of myself as somebody who is not affiliated with a research institute now. And I wonder, at these time points, would I have access to the literature? So in 2011, I would have had no access to the literature as it was all closed access. In 2021, I have some access. There's a lot of open access publications now. And in 2031, I'll have full access to all of the literature as the policies move towards an open access future. If I look at publishing literature, in 2011, as somebody with no research funding, I could publish my papers, my academic papers, because it was free. It cost no money. And today, if I want to publish open access, there is often a fee. So I'm not sure what the future of publishing looks like. If we look at these two things when applied to academic data, in 2011, there was no or little access to the data and no real ability to publish data. There were some repositories, but for the vast majority of researchers, there was nowhere to publish my data. Today, through platforms like figshare or Dryad or Zenodo, there is a place where any researcher can publish their data. And a lot of the data is being made available. So researchers do have access to data. My question in this presentation is, where do we go from the last 10 years of researchers beginning to make their data openly available to a world where we can make that data really useful and move the needle on publishing? So I mentioned open access papers. This is a global viewpoint from our sister organization, Dimensions. And you can see that in 2019, we passed the point where the majority of papers published are published as open access globally. So in developing new data publishing infrastructure, we've been thinking about why researchers would make their data available. What are the barriers stopping them making their data available? And how they think about data publishing in general around the world. So for 7 years now, we've been running the State of Open Data. It is a survey that goes out every year in partnership with Springer Nature. And we've had over 25,000 respondents from 192 countries over that time. And importantly, we ask the same questions. So it's provided us with a sustained look at the state of open data over time. And we can understand how the researcher thoughts around open data is changing over time. This is last year's report, and I will be updating some new information in this presentation, but I also wanted to look back. As I said, it's a global report, and we were very lucky last year to have some commentary from our colleagues at J-Stage Data. So this is a piece by my colleague Nobuko and Lida-san, talking about J-Stage and J-Stage data and the state of data publishing in Japan. If we look at last year's data, you can see some of the trends that are emerging. And this is how researchers across the globe responded when asked what their concerns were about publishing data. This is, you can see at the top here, concerns about the misuse of data is the #1 concern. And this has grown as we saw fake news and COVID causing researchers to become more concerned about the use of their data by other people. Not receiving enough credit or acknowledgement from academia is another reason why researchers don't want to share their data. And then a lot of the other things seem to be concerns around the fact that this is a new area. 10 years ago, researchers didn't have to publish their data. So for the vast majority of researchers, this is a completely new field. This is, they have lots of questions and they don't know where to go to get those questions answered. One interesting thing we saw in last year's survey is when asked, should the funders require researchers to share their data, the vast majority of researchers said, yes, they should be forced to share their data. And if researchers didn't share their data, their funding should be removed. So this is 2/3 of researchers. And this for me was, it was a shock because I didn't think that researchers held such strong opinions about publishing data. But I think this is more to do with the fact that researchers want to be treated fairly. And if their colleagues are not sharing their data, they don't want to share their own data. So it only works if everybody is treated the same and everybody has to share their data. So that was a look at last year to understand why researchers are thinking about sharing data. But we can look in more depth at what is causing them to need to share their data and what they're actually doing. So the good news about this space being more than 10 years old is that we now have quantitative data about how the impact of research is changing. And so this paper here looked at 500,000 papers, and it found that if you make your data available in a repository like JStage data, the papers themselves that link to the data on average get a 25% increase in citations. So this is great news for researchers and great news for transparency. If you make the data available when you publish the paper, your work is going to have more impact, in this case, via citations. We've also seen funders around the world have growing mandates for publishing data. So these funders saying, if we fund you, we want you to publish all of the files. So when we think about data, I speak to a lot of researchers who say they have no data. But when you think about researchers doing the research, the files that they generate, whether they are actual spreadsheet data sets or medical images or humanities research, as we'll hear about later, there is the funders who fund the research saying that at the point at which you publish your publication, you have to make the data available too. And so the big one from this year was, or the one that got the most attention this year, was the National Institute of Health, the biggest funder of medical research in the world. But we've also seen UNESCO come out with a statement on open science and open research. So growing, we're seeing every funder say that you need to make your data available. And the NIH is an interesting one because they are backing up this policy by working with generalist repositories such as figshare or Dryad or the Open Science Framework, and trying to get all of the repositories to work in a similar manner. So they are not just saying you need to do this, you need to make your data openly available. They're also saying we are going to help you by preparing training materials, by implementing open metrics around these data set publications. So the open metrics is an interesting one. I'm the co-chair of the working group on open metrics, and this is very related to credit for research. So if you're a researcher and you want to publish your data sets and have more impact, the way in which we measure citations or downloads of data sets may influence how you get credit for your research in the future. And so the National Institute of Health doing this work and making the repositories work together is a great example of a funder coming up with an action plan to back up the policy. And I think that's something we need to see more of globally. When I say lots of funders are telling you to make your data openly available, there is a website called Sherpa Juliet that has all of the funder policies. And they say there are 52 funders globally who require their researchers to publish their data, and a further 34% who encourage their researchers to make their data as openly available. So this is a global push from funders, but it'd be great to see the funders following through, providing funding, providing support, and helping researchers. They're not the only stakeholder here, as I'll talk about, but they are a very, very strong motivator for researchers to share their data. This has been happening for a few years now, and what's really interesting to me is this statement at the bottom of this slide, that more than 2/3, so 66% of respondents to the new State of Open Data, this is the State of Open Data 2022. It is coming out in 2 weeks from now. And 2/3 of the respondents said that they are supportive to some extent of the national mandate for making research data openly available. But this number has been declining over the last few years. And I think this is really interesting to think about what we are asking researchers to do. Researchers are busy. They have to comply with new policies. They have to apply for funding. And if you ask a researcher, do they think open science is a good thing? I'm sure the majority of them would say yes. But when you actually get to the point at which you're saying you need to do something, you have extra work to do, then we may see some more pushback from the researchers. And I think this is really important. Another thing from this year's report, this data is not open yet, so this is brand new, is that when researchers were asked who they go to for support in publishing their data, the number one group was publishers. So the majority of researchers, when they need help with publishing their data, will look for help from the publisher. Interestingly, 38% relied upon their own institution, so the librarians, research officers. So this is really interesting in understanding how researchers think and who they rely on for publishing academic content. This also means that there's lots of opportunities at this level for both publishers, universities, funders. In terms of credit for data, you may remember that this is something that researchers said last year they didn't get enough credit. So this is the question for a researcher: what's in it for me? how do I advance my career? How can I have more impact from my research? And 75% of the respondents said that they get too little credit for sharing their data. But interestingly, again, now we have the information of seeing data being published for a few years, that 66% of those who have published their data have received some credit already, have had some impact. Most commonly, this was via a full citation. So citations are important to researchers, and researchers are seeing that if they publish their data, they can get more citations of the data set and of the paper itself. So this is great news. Of course, we are in Japan, and whilst there are many similarities around the world, funders around the world are all coming out with policies. We do see some regional differences. And when the report comes out in 2 weeks, you'll be able to look at the data from a Japanese perspective and see exactly what is happening with Japanese researchers. But just to give you an idea of some of the regional differences, if we looked at how capable researchers felt about publishing data, in the United States, 69% said that they felt sufficiently competent to develop a practical data management plan. So they know what they're supposed to be doing when it comes to publishing data, and they know how to publish the data. Of course, that's not 100%. So there is still a good proportion of American researchers who do not feel that they know what they're doing. But when we look at Japan specifically, 58% of researchers said that they would require some more training or further information to publish their data. So this is very relevant for JStage and the society publishers who are helping researchers publish their data, because they are at the interface of the researchers who find this area completely new and being able to support them with their data publishing. So we've talked about what researchers say they do, but it's very easy to say something. It's a lot harder to do what you say you're going to do. And so we're very lucky in that we have a report from a sister company of ours called Repater. And they looked at the academic literature and looked for data availability statements, policies on whether they had ethical statements for their research, whether they had made their code available. And they focused on 5 different funders around the world and looked at the research papers that these funders funded and asked, are the researchers doing what they should be doing? Are the researchers doing what they say they are doing? So these 2 graphs are focused specifically on data availability statements. So this is looking at academic papers and saying, how many of the papers have data availability statements? So these are funders who all say you should be sharing your data. We have a German funder, an American funder, a Chinese funder, the European Commission. And on the graph on the left, you can see that the majority of funders are publishing research with more data availability statements than they were in 2016. For the National Institute of Health, which is the purple line, it's gone from 12% to 40% of papers. So we now see a lot of papers with researchers saying we are making our data available, or we have a statement about our data availability. The graph on the right looks at where researchers are making their data available. So the good news is that the majority of them are making their data available in repositories as they are supposed to, like JStage data. But you can see the orange bar here is the German funder, and you still see that more researchers are saying that their data is available upon request than it is available in a repository. So there is still some work to do here. And whilst different countries have different success levels, there is general trends around the world. If you look at the most frequently used repository types for data availability statements, you can see here are some highlighted and the growth from 2016 to 2019. And one thing that is concerning to me about this graph is that the most used repository is GitHub. GitHub is a fantastic tool, but it is not a repository. Researchers can delete those files that they have made available at any time, and therefore it doesn't meet the basic criteria of a data repository. So whilst it's good that researchers are making their data available in repositories and in GitHub, we really need to make sure that researchers are sharing their data in a repository that ticks the basic requirements of a data repository. They need to be able to mint persistent identifiers, to create persistent identifiers, ideally digital object identifiers, DOIs. They also need to make sure that the data persists, that the data is around forever, in the same way that academic papers are available forever. One interesting extra mention around data availability statements, in the graph on the left-hand side, you can see the growth of usage, and you can see the pink line there is GitHub, which is growing very fast, but not a data repository. And when I did my own research on figshare, I found that although there was a large number of people saying the data is available on figshare in the data availability statement, there was also a lot of people who were linking to the data set from the methods, the references section. And so the actual amount of people making their data available was 2 times higher than the amount of people that were making their data available in the data availability statement. So this is really good news that more data is being made available than we think. It's really fantastic to see data being made available in different repositories around the world. It's great to see that those different repositories around the world are all aiming for the same quality of data publishing. So what comes next? If we go back to the beginning, I've been looking back 10 years and looking forwards 10 years. 10 years ago, researchers were not making their data available. 10 years ago, Jim Gray was suggesting that in order to move academia further, faster, we need to move to this next paradigm. That is making all of the data openly available and having the machines help us discover new knowledge. And what's been fantastic to see is that this is already coming true. So AlphaFold is the AI product from Google, from DeepMind, a Google product. And in 2021, they used machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict the protein structure for all of the proteins involved in humans. So this was a very hard process to do. It involved crystallography, and over the last 50 years, researchers had spent a lot of time and a lot of money on discovering what the shape was of proteins in the human body. They'd got to 26% of all proteins. And then with AlphaFold, overnight, almost instantaneously, they went from 26% to 100% of the protein structures in humans. And then in the year since then, they've gone from 1 million protein structures to over 200 million structures. So this is something that would have taken hundreds and hundreds of years using the old methods of working. And because of open data, artificial intelligence, humans and machines working together, they were able to move this field of research to the next level. And as a reward for this amazing work that they've done, last week, just over 10 days ago, AlphaFold, the AI product, won the $3 million breakthrough prize for research. So I think that this may be the first example of an AI winning the Nobel Prize. It's even more incredible to think that 10 years ago, we had predictions that we might be able to do this one way if we change the way in which academics publish research. And in just a short decade, we've been able to move one field of research onto the next level. So the question is, how do we do this for every field of research? And for me, the biggest problem we have with data publishing is that it's a new field for lots of researchers. As the state of open data shows, they don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And when we see people using generalist repositories, there is usually no checks on the data done. And so you see researchers publishing data sets, and they give the data set the title data set. So this is the equivalent of publishing an academic paper and calling the paper paper. So not very useful, not very discoverable. Nobody is going to be able to find your paper on the internet if you call your paper paper. The same is true of the data set if you call it data set. And this highlights where researchers need help, or they need somebody to check the metadata on these files before they're made public. Because if we have a world where lots of different data sets are published, but can be linked to one another using metadata, or even better, the same types of data have the same types of metadata, then we can prepare the data for the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, so that every section of research can move further faster. And we can all move on to this next paradigm of research. So in an ideal world, when researchers go to publish their data set, humans will check that their data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is the concept of fair data. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. If all data is fair, then more artificial intelligence algorithms will be able to interpret the results without the need for human intervention. So for me, as a repository builder, we build data repositories for organizations. We allow somebody to check the files before they're made public. So this could be someone in editorial at a publisher's. This can be someone in the library at a university. But it will require people. And I can't think of a way in which we can improve metadata without training researchers to have better metadata, or without having people checking the files themselves. And both of these things take a lot of manpower. So it's a big question on who is going to do this, but I am very confident that it will become the academic norm that making your data available and having someone check the metadata will be something we see in the next 10 years. 2 years ago, we did a pilot study with the National Institute of Health. We looked at if we had somebody check the metadata when researchers published data sets, what happened to those data sets. And so predictably, if you have somebody asking for more metadata, you get more metadata. You get more descriptive information. We also saw that as well as getting bigger data sets, you also got more views and more downloads of those data sets. So this is a big motivator for organizations that are publishing data. If you are an organization that is publishing data, if you can help your researchers add better metadata, then they will have more views, more downloads, and more impact. And so when I'm thinking of the JStage data repository specifically, I think there is a huge opportunity in the next 10 years for thematic society repositories. So repositories built around the societies. If we look, we see that different fields of research are moving at different speeds. If you look at papers published in different fields, you see that there are more researchers making data available in biological sciences than there are in history and archaeology, which you might predict, but it also just highlights the different fields are moving at different speeds and need customized help. A researcher publishing biological sciences data will probably have a different set of requirements and need to have a different conversation with someone than someone publishing history data. And when we think about who are the experts in these specific fields, society publishers are the experts of one specific domain. We see this with the way the JStage repository is set up, in that you have different journals with their own sub-repository. So these different journals could start thinking about what is best for their specific community. As researchers look for help in their specific field, we know that the majority of researchers go to publishers for help. the societies are in a very good place for moving data forward. If we look at why this is true, learned societies are organizations of scholars which exist to support and promote their disciplinary communities. So it is the mission of these societies to help support the researchers in that one specific field. And they have a nuanced understanding of the research data that should be shared. So all of these communities know more about the data that's being produced in their communities than anybody else. And when we think about what metadata we should capture with each data set, there are going to be different ontologies and different schemas for different types of data in different fields. We also can look at things from the compliance point of view. With publishers making data available, they can work together with the academic funders to check the compliance of researchers making code, data, and other outputs available. So this is a screen grab from our sister organization Dimensions that is starting to parse through paper publications and say, are the researchers doing what they should be doing? So this researcher funded by this funder with this grant code was supposed to make the papers, the data sets openly available. Are they doing that? Are they making their data openly available in a way that the funders can check? Because the funders know that making data available is going to be better value for money for the research that they fund. We can even do this down to the different types of repositories that researchers in different funders are using. So we can get a real good understanding of whether researchers are complying with policies. And we can start to think about a carrot and a stick method to encouraging researchers to make their data available. The carrot and the stick method, I think, will be benefited when researchers start seeing metadata that is related to their field. So when they are told to publish data sets and they see subject-specific metadata for their particular field of research, they will feel like it's their community. They will feel that it's just something that everyone in their community does. So I think subject-specific schemas is something that is needed and can be developed by communities, developed by societies. So this is still very early days in the space. I'm trying to think of what the opportunities are for researchers and for society publishers going forward. I think that JStage and the setup with Japanese publishers and society publishers have a real opportunity to make themselves the most relevant place to go when researchers in their community are looking to publish their data. We are at the point now where data publishing will become the norm. In 10 short years, we've gone from practically nothing to the majority of researchers having to share their data. So now these communities can be supported. It's not going to be easy. There's lots of questions. There's lots of hard work still to be done. But just like we can start thinking about subject-specific repositories around COVID data, we can start to think about subject-specific repositories around the data associated from one society publisher. So I wanted to finish by saying the future is bright for open data. It's a lot of work, but there's so much that can be achieved in this very unique time in academic publishing history, where we go from an older way of working to a newer way of working. and a newer way of knowledge discovery. I won't say everything that's on this slide, but I just wanted to highlight that it is a spectrum. There is data that with no checks on them, no checks on the metadata, that can still be useful. The context may be in the paper that's linking to it. So if I'm reading a paper and I see there's a data set attached, it doesn't really matter if the metadata isn't fantastic, if the context of what has happened to create that data set is in the paper. But in order to move to a world where the machines help us move academia forward with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, we need great metadata around those data sets. So the speed at which any given scientific discipline advances will depend on how well its researchers collaborate with one another. This is what Jim Gray said in 2010. If we make all of the data and all of the literature available online, open access, then we'll move to a world where researchers don't need to collaborate. They will just be able to go and get the information. So in order to do this, it takes a combination of tech and people and culture. We at figshare feel we can help with the tech. There's still a lot of work to do. And society publishers are perfectly placed to help with the people and the culture. So that's everything from me. I'm happy to answer any questions there may be. But otherwise, thanks a lot for your time.